Now, I suspect I am not alone in having had a number of moments of loneliness in my life. Let me speak a moment to middle school. I think that's almost common to be like the stereotype, but it's also true, right? I was one of those kids for certain periods of time that had a hard time finding people to sit with at lunch. I got on better with some of the boys, but what they talked about at lunch really wasn't quite my thing. And in fact, I really wanted to sit with the girls, but they really didn't make space for me, including the ones that I got on with and liked me, but didn't want to show that they liked me for fear that they would be excluded from the circles as well. And this was visible enough. I mean, I sat on the same kind of long tables in the cafeteria, but just far enough away so that even the teachers noticed. Oh, that's embarrassing. Even the teachers noticed, maybe said something to me, maybe even said something to my parents, which kind of made it worse, or at least more self conscious. I will offer that this period of time wasn't forever. It was enough, though. It was enough to know what it's like to be disconnected in a room full of people. Now, I experienced the more specific definition of loneliness when I spent a year in Maine for my second internship as a minister. Now, the more specific definition of loneliness is fairly simple. It's the lack of meaningful connection, meaningful personal connection. But while I was in uh, Maine for a year, I was in the last year of my divinity school degree, and I wanted to add on to my experience. So, yes, let's pile on another internship because that's me. And I was on my own as a student minister in Belfast. Beautiful harbor town, beautiful. My supervisor was 2 hours away. I mean, I was it. And it is one thing to be alone or feeling lonely in familiar surroundings, like when I was younger and in middle school, but it was my school, I was going home to my family every day and so on. And it's another thing to be alone when away from all of those systems. Family, friends, classmates, even friends of friends, as I had in college and divinity school in person. So, this for me was a first time to live on my own away from any past social contacts. There weren't this kind of crowd, this population, if you will, of people who would have been glad to see me if I ran into them at the local co op, which was the social center of town, I will say. Now, the congregation members were lovely. They were. And they still have a very much a place in my heart as well. But they were not my friends. That was not a personal relationship. I met friends of the congregation, which also was good, and got to know people, especially who were part of the recovery community. That was a fairly large, connected network there. One of the things I figured out in Maine in winter, do not go to Maine without a job and a relationship. I'm just offering that as advice. I had to figure out my own heart as well as serve with the congregation. I was in that definition of loneliness as offered by the US Surgeon General's study, 2023 study, Our Epidemic of Loneliness and Isolation. And in that study, they offer this definition of loneliness is a subjective, distressing experience that results from perceived isolation or inadequate meaningful connections, where inadequate refers to the discrepancy or unmet need between an individual's preferred and actual experience. So, loneliness, in essence, is wanting more meaningful connections and feeling the lack of them acutely. Rick Maston, the late UU minister and troubadour, kind of gets to that feeling in a more visceral way in his poem, From the Shore. He says, I ain't waving, babe, I'm drowning. Going down into a low, cold, lonely sea. I ain't waving, babe, I'm drowning. So, babe, quit waving at me. I ain't waving, babe, I'm crying. I'm crying, oh, why can't you see? I ain't fooling, babe, I ain't fooling. So, babe, quit fooling with me. I ain't waving, babe, I'm drowning. I'm going down here right in front of you, and you're waving, babe, you keep waving. Hey, babe, are you drowning too? Are you drowning too? No one wants to be so lost. Yet, how often is part of us crying, can't you see me? This concern of loneliness in our individual lives and in our world is so deep that the US Surgeon General didn't just study it. Their office offered a warning about its impact on our individual and collective health. They say loneliness and its negative impact has been rising in our society for some decades. The pandemic and the enforced isolation boosted the experience of loneliness, and it's continuing to impact all of us. For a faith tradition such as this, grounded in connection and emphasizing relationship, the lateral and the transcendent, speaking to loneliness is part of our task. It is part of the mission of this church, in essence, to grow in mind, body, and spirit, and adding to the wholeness and the healing of the world, to love abundantly. So that means the brokenheartedness is our business. And it's not just a to-do list of how to meet people, too. I mean, you can make a top 10 list of how to find people. It's how do you cultivate relationship? And there's a distinction I want to make. We've talked about loneliness a little bit, but I want to make a distinction between it and isolation. Isolation, as the Surgeon General was talking about, is something that can be measured. You can measure how many points of contact a person does or doesn't have. That's a degree of isolation. That can be objectively measured. Solitude is also one of the things that people think about. Solitude, by contrast, is also subjective, as loneliness is. But solitude is more, as they offer in their study definition, is being by oneself in any context and feels more chosen. One can feel more centered and not lonely. The definition of solitude for the Surgeon General is not lonely. I love that. But loneliness is that subjective absence of connection. Former Surgeon General Dr. Vivek Murthy talks about this in his letter in the report. He says, when I first took office as Surgeon General in 2014, I didn't view loneliness as a public health concern. But that was before I embarked on a cross-country listening tour where I heard stories from my fellow Americans that surprised me. People began to tell me they felt isolated, invisible, and insignificant, even when they couldn't put their finger on the word lonely. Time and time again, people of all ages, social, economic backgrounds, from every corner of the country would tell me, I have to shoulder life's burdens all by myself. Or, if I disappear tomorrow, no one will even notice. He says, it was a light bulb moment for me. The social disconnection was far more common than he realized. And in recent years, he goes on, about 1 in 2 Americans reported experience loneliness, and that was before the COVID-19 pandemic. Loneliness, they found, is far more than just a bad feeling. It harms both the individual and societal health. It is associated with a greater risk of cardiovascular disease, dementia, stroke, depression, anxiety, and premature death. And the mortality impact of being socially disconnected is similar to that caused by smoking up to 15 cigarettes a day. And even greater than that is associated with obesity and physical inactivity. And he says the harmful consequences on a society that lacks social connection can be felt in our schools, our workplaces, and civic organizations where performance, productivity, and engagement are diminished. We have direct encounters, tangible experience. I can imagine, I know for myself, and I imagine also for you, how much this impact on our society shows up. It shows up as a lack of self worth and confidence. It shows up not by somebody necessarily saying lonely, but as anger and fear and addiction. And because we are such social creatures, that when there's this lack of social connection, there's a feeling of failure, that we are not worthy, that we should be ashamed of ourselves because we are seriously, look, we're not enough. And speaking up to ask for help or simply to reach out is to be vulnerable. It is to risk. And as I'm sure we know, one of the deepest ways that loneliness appears shows up in those who choose to leave the world and take their lives. I won't spend a lot of time on that, but I want to acknowledge this, and that those who survive and continue are end up with more questions as well. Could we have done more? And then having to find our own answers to those questions makes it that much more difficult, and the feeling of loneliness more acute. And finally, we have a social impact that is visible to us, not just in our health, but also recognizing how desperate people are for connection, how much we will seek that out even when those options are unhealthy or destructive to our social fabric. We have so many young men, for example, gravitating to social and political extremes of hatred, of exclusion, because they are ending up being a receptive audience to someone saying, "We see you, come on in." One of the places where we can, in fact, start to find some power in this conversation in a moment when it feels like there's so much taken away, there's so much separation encouraged and nurtured in our world, so much division is cultivated and strategically done to us. But we have, in fact, our own power. Simply by making room for this conversation is an act of power. It is a choice to talk about mental health, social health, and how imperfect we are, how messed up, how heartbroken, how much we feel like a social failure. We've had a long trend in our society, especially Western society, of people moving away from religious institutions. Religious institutions have been, in many ways, their own worst enemy about being exclusive, about protecting people who are doing harm to others, about preaching gospels that are in fact harmful and to further discount our inherent worth. And there are so many religious communities that are doing good things, that are in fact offering a message of love and care, that are wanting to be based in compassion and reaching out because these are human institutions. There's as much as it's we don't quite know what religious institutions are going to be in the next few decades. We know they're not as a whole going to go out of business anytime soon because we are human places where we are much needed for gathering of all ages, places where we can be tolerated with our social awkwardness. Yeah, I'm just saying, even I, even I, after all these years in ministry, having a job that I gives me a role I could walk into with, even I can appreciate how walking into coffee hour can have flashes back to the cafeteria in middle school. Oh my gosh, can I sit with people? I don't know. Part of making room for that conversation is also recognizing how much we've grown and learned about those uh, about neurodivergence, about being on the autism spectrum, about social challenges that we may have for various reasons. That's also here. That's also part of our power is to be able to have that conversation and to be treating each other with grace and attention and curiosity when we don't quite know. We have this fantastic opportunity to be amazed and curious about the full range of how humans' brains work. And we have some range in how our human brains work. I'm just saying, and how that shows up socially. This is a wonderful moment to put love into practice and put love at the center. What's the most loving thing we can do is to learn about each other. We gather together in congregations and talk about being, uh, we need not believe alike to love alike, but we have an opportunity to live into that by not assuming we know what each other is like, by not assuming that we know that somebody else wouldn't want to be reached out to. We get to help each other communicate in compassion and care. And certainly that includes the real quick and easy answer of find people. Find people and small groups and events where we can actually fully meet and talk. I appreciate former Surgeon General Dr. Murthy. One of the points he made in an interview in the Hidden Brain podcast was get to know yourself. This too is a place of power and choice. Get to know yourself. Connect with yourself and then figure it. Then that helps know what is, how I might explore, how to connect, where to be, what to try, and apply compassion with that getting to know oneself. Because when yet another event maybe doesn't work, or you go to a party and it's socially awkward and you have to just leave, and that's okay, you're not beating yourself up about it either. Each of us can start now. The Surgeon General reminds us each of us can start now in our own lives by strengthening our connections and relationships. Our individual relationships, he says, are an untapped resource, a source of healing hidden in plain sight. And that can help us live healthier, productive, and more fulfilled lives. Answer that call from a friend He says, make time for the meal, live without listen without the distraction of your phone. I know that's a little risk for some of us. Perform an act of service. He says the keys to human connection are simple but extraordinarily powerful, and they are. It's not magic, it's not going to happen all at once. But there is greatness in our hearts and in our lives. And I also want to offer how that much we are companioning each other in this can reach out. One of the places I found that this could be connected is through that another kind of loneliness that is also out there, not just the social one that I've been talking about, but there's a certain cosmic loneliness, a certain I'm not sure where I am as this one tiny dot in the blue marble of space, right? The greatness that is around me is far more vast than I can even begin to comprehend. How do I locate myself? Because we are in this cosmos together, and what's also true is that we are not any more of an expert than the other. There's reasons why we seek meaning. We have study groups. We talk to one another in these small conversations because we are trying to figure out our social and our cosmic location. We search for this meaning together. From Angela Herrera, she says, you stand at the edge of mystery, at the edge of the deep, with the light streaming at you, and you can't hide anything, not even from yourself, when you stand there like that. And then what? She says, maybe you call your pastor and say, what is this? What am I looking at? What do I do? And your pastor comes over and stands at the edge with you. I'm just going to say that would be me. Comes over and stands at the edge with you and says, I have no idea. We do it together. We think of all the generations who've come before that have cast this question out. What do we do? How do we live in love? Wanting to find it and name it and wanting to have an answer. And so, but there isn't one specific one. We simply stand before the mystery and do this together. Our power in this moment, in the brokenness of our hearts, and the loneliness and the emptiness of our lives, is far greater and far more diverse than we know. It's not in the grand movements, it is in the small, it is in the moment, it is in the impulse to say, hey, I wonder how they're doing. And in doing so, we cultivate greatness of resilience, of practice of welcome, of the practice of love for ourselves, even and especially when we don't know the way or there's no guarantee of the result, but we simply put ourselves out into the world and try and love again. So let us go forth. Amen.